Hello and welcome to the Back Garden Garage. Now I am restoring a BMW E30. Now as you can probably see, it is on its side right now, and that is with the help of a homemade car rotisserie that I built, and it just makes the underside of this car much easier to get to carry out all of the rust repairs. Now my plan of attack has been on this car to do section at a time. Now that includes cutting out any rust where I find it, making and shaping new metal to put in it, and then once it's in, get it painted in a coat of epoxy to protect it until I get around to doing the finishing work later down the line. And in the last couple of videos I tried some new techniques. Tried shot blasting at home. Hell of a mess that thing made, long story short. I also gave a bit of spraying a go with a spray gun because I do hopefully intend to spray the car. So if that's the sort of thing that you are interested in and want to join me on the journey, then feel free to subscribe to the channel and see this E30 get back on the road where it belongs. So I have been going through off camera and just taking big chunks of undersill off with a multi-tool to remove as much as I can, and then going over it again with a wire wheel in a drill just to remove the remainder of the residue. But this section here, look at it, it's just needs to go, doesn't it? Now there is no shot blasting in the world that'll take that off, so I'm gonna have to chop it out and make some new metal panels to go in. Now I have already done a previous repair on the other side of the car in this exact area, although that area hadn't been repaired, so there's a little bit more I need to remove before I can start adding new. Now the other complication in this side is I have a lot of brackets in here that are all to do with the accelerator pedal. Now obviously I want that pedal to work when I'm done, so I'm going to need to take a few measurements of all of these brackets. Just make a note of them somewhere, just so that when I go to put it back in, there's a half a chance it's going to work. So there we have it. That is the section I'm working on. Nothing left to do but to crack on with it. So I start with a paint and rust remover disc in the grinder and just remove all of the seam sealer and paintwork around the edge of the rust just to see how far it goes. And then I take a little bit of time and just look at it and see where it makes the most sense to chop it out. I decide to remove the top spot weld from the accelerator bracket, and to do that I need to expose it from the inner wheel arch. I miss it the first time round, but on the second attempt I see the little divot. Then I center punch it, and then using a spot weld drill bit just drill out that spot weld to release the top half of that bracket. With that freed off, it allows me then to chop out this previous repair section. The next section I'm cutting out is the floor. Cutting it back as far as it needs to go. I actually didn't quite get all of it. I needed to chop a bit more out. So even with all that thinking, I still managed to get it wrong. But that is what I'm doing now. And I'm leaving it in fairly big sections as well, so that I can work out how best to go about remaking them when it's time to go back in. And if that wasn't enough, I decided to just cut all of it out, removing this big nasty patch on the outside. So yeah, it is starting to get a little bit scary now. Well, I take it all back. I was wrong, definitely wrong with this one. This side is nothing like the other side that I've already repaired. The previous repair on it makes it so once you cut it out, you can truly see the extent. And when I got the floor cut out, the inner sill was rotten right back as well. So that's all going to need replacing. So I have cut 95% of the rust out. There's still more to go up the bulkhead. However, I've cut enough out now, it's starting to get scary. So I want to start getting panels back in. Anyway, enough yapping. Got plenty of work to get on with. So there are a number of sections here of metal that need to be replaced. The floor is a section that I need to make, but I don't know where it finishes yet because there's no sill. There is also an inner sill. So there'll be an inside bit, an outside bit, the floor, the bulkhead. Now the inner sill, again, is gone. That there was nothing left of that one. So I think that is the one I'm going to concentrate on. Because I need to know where the floor lines up to and where the outer sill goes to. So I am going to start by having some good access, seeing the cars on the rotisserie. I'm going to rotate it over and it'll just make things much easier to work on. Now the sill is a little bit bent, so I do straighten out a little bit to be able to get a straight edge on the sill. In this case I'm just using a piece of wood, and we're going to clamp it on, aligning it with the original sill that's left, and that in theory should give me a straight edge to work to. Because these BMWs are quite straight and quite square in places. Now I'm going to use just some paper here and clamp it on to that straight edge. And that will allow me to mark out on the paper where all of the sort of bend lines and important components need to be twisted and shaped. I'm just using a radius that I found that matches the inside nicely, and I'm just going to add on, as I say, all of the markings onto this bit of paper, so I've got a layout of the approximate size and shapes of the bends. And then once I have it all marked out, I will transfer it over to a piece of steel and get it cut out, and it should give me a good starting point. Now I am adding a bit of a border on this piece of steel, and that will become clear a little bit later, but I need to add it on just for the extra sizing. Then it's just trace it out, mark it out, cut it out, transfer all of the information on that sheet over, and then go over to the shear that I have. Now this shear is brilliant. I really do enjoy it. It makes things so much easier. It's just a little bit tricky where I've got it located on the bench when I'm using a full sheet of steel. But yeah, it slices the steel like butter. Really recommend a tool like this if you are doing a lot of sheet metal work. I also want to add that this piece of steel is thicker than what I'm used to. Only by a little bit. It's 1.2 millimeters. After giving this a trim with just some hand snips, I then try to put my ideas into practice, and yeah, you'll see how that goes. So my plan here was to make up a basic jig using some old scrap wood that I've got, and then hit the metal down to give it the shape while keeping the edges nice and flat and straight with each other. Now I spent quite a bit of time with a big mallet here, hitting it down and bending it, before realising I bent it the wrong way, so I spent a bit of time cursing at the camera. Couldn't believe the mistake that I made. So yeah, hammer back out and bend it back the right way and give it another go. Now, when I did take it out of the wood, it was okay. Looking back on it, it was better than what I can remember, but it wasn't quite the sharpness in those bends that I was looking for. So I decided to crack out the bead roller. Now this bead roller is very good at putting bends in quite precise places. Now the dies that you need, I don't have the exact right ones to make the step that I'm looking for. So I've kind of offset a set of dies that I've got to give me that edge. So I put the piece of metal in there and tighten it up so it is clamping down with the tightness that I think. And I'm just going to speed it up a little bit, but essentially work along those lines that I marked into the metal to give me that clean edge or break that I'm looking for. Now, why did I bother with that wooden setup? That was much easier, a lot less strain on the wrist, smashing away on that. And it's given me a good edge. I'm happy with it. Flipping those dies around really worked a treat. Now I need to run another line, essentially bending it back the other way. So I'm going to do that and we'll see what kind of result that gives me, because it has distorted the metal, which I knew it would do, and why I did attempt that jig in the first place. Only a little bit, but I'm not going to straighten it out yet until I know what the next bead line is going to result in. So to get this bend, it is essentially going the other way to the one that I just done. So I flip the dies over in the bender. Now that does mean that it sort of interferes with the metalwork and causes some extra creases, but in general I am happy with the sort of result of that bead roller. And I just use a hammer on the anvil and just try to remove where the metal is distorted and flatten it back out as best I can. When I have got it to a point that I'm kind of happy with, I just measure it up on the car, and there you can see a lot clearer the type of shapes that I am going for. And then I just have to now keep marking out and cutting down and trimming this piece of steel until I have got a reasonably good fit. So that is looking pretty good. Now, a mistake I've made in the past, and I'm not going to do it this time, before I make those absolute final line-up cuts, I need to clean the cuts on the body of the car, because they are just rough cut at the minute. So I want a nice smooth line to work to. So I'm just going to tackle it with a finger sander and get it back smooth for, yeah, a nice clean line. Now that's all cleaned up, I did spend, I don't know how long, just trimming and finalising this piece. Now it's not perfect, it's very close, but I'm getting to the point where it is still slightly distorted and I just can't seem to get rid of that distortion. Annoyingly as well, it does actually appear that the metal in the car is the sort of thinner 1mm sort of thickness, so I didn't need to use the thicker stuff. But I have now, and I'm certainly not going to start again. Now, what I think I'm going to do with this piece now, I'll just clean up the backside of it, clean the pen marks off of it. I'm going to start tacking it in bit by bit and manipulating it just to get that final fitment just right. I'm hoping that doesn't bite me in the backside. Let's find out. Now, I do like to show my welding because it has been a learning process, this project. But unfortunately, yeah, this is the best view you're going to get of me tacking the top section of this metal together. Now, with the bottom section, I do clamp together with a big set of grips that you can see here. And you can see, obviously, I'm tacking it together, holding it in place with that set of grips. But when it comes to welding the top section back together, I didn't learn. And yeah, unfortunately, this is some of the best views you're going to get. I do move the camera over in a minute, and you will get to see the rest of the finished welding. That piece is now in, and it was much more difficult than I was anticipating. It took much longer. I wish I never bothered trying that jig to begin with. Anyway, you learn all your lessons. Now I've got this in, and it is in pretty much a straight line down the rest of the plane of the car. So I'm relatively happy with that. Now it doesn't line up perfectly at the bottom, but the bottom piece that I need to join it to is full of rust, so I'm going to have to make a new panel there anyway. So I'll make the two match up when I make that new piece to go in. Now I wish I used the thinner metal for that piece, because it would have been much easier to shape and bend and keep all the contours, but I didn't. This next section, however, the floor section, is the thinner metal, so I'm hoping this is going to be a doddle in comparison. Watch me eat my words on that one. So I'm going to have a quick tidy up, and then I'm going to move on to the floor section, take some measurements. Let's go. Now when I take these measurements, I am going to add an extra little bit of lip on one side that I will need to bend. You'll see it later on, so for plug welding. But with it marked out and cut out in the shear, cuts it like butter, it does. I use the old section of floor that I've got left and mark out all of the indentations in the floor that I'm going to need to use the bead roller for. And with those marked out, I have actually got some dies that match it pretty well. So I put them in the bead roller and get them all rolled out. Now you can see this bead roller is just a budget tool, and you can see just how much flex there is in it, especially when I have speeded up the footage here. But you get what you pay for at the end of the day, and I think the result that I get using this bead roller is yeah, I'm fairly impressed with it, and I wouldn't want to spend any more, to be honest with you. Next tool up is a sheet metal bender. Now this I have borrowed because I don't use it that often, and I am making sure this time around I am bending it the right way. I don't want to have another mishap like I did earlier on. With that bent at a 90 degree, and that is that extra lip that I was referring to earlier on, I move on to the next tool, which is a metal shrinker, and this will allow me to curve the metal. Now it does that in a quite a clever way. It essentially clamps the metal together and squeezes it as you press the lever. So clamps and squeezes. Yeah, fantastic little tool for that. And I am applying it to that 90 degree bend that I applied just a minute ago in that bender. And I just little by little add a curve to the sheet of metal. Now, as you see, it's only little at the moment, so I go and check it against the car, and then do it a bit more, and check it against the car, until finally I get a curve that I am happy with. Now, The rest of the metal is still flat, and that just needs a bit of encouragement. With the bend on that right angle, it really does strengthen up the steel. So I'm just using a soft mallet over a bit of wood and just giving it that final tweak so all of it is bent over, giving it the curve throughout this panel. There is still one bend left to achieve, a much simpler bend. So I'm just lining it up in the car and marking that out where it needs to be. Now this is probably the easiest tool that I've had to use so far, and that is just the vise itself. I am just clamping it in place and just giving it a bit of tweak by hand, and again using a sort of rubber mallet as to not damage the steel or indent it too much. Just giving that a little bit of encouragement to put that bend in place. Now this is the bit that I'm really not looking forward to. I'm kind of free-handed it here and having a bit of a think because I struggled with it last time. So yeah, I didn't sound too enthusiastic about that one. So I'm going to use the bead roller again, and I'm going to put a straight bend in there and then a curved bend in there to give me a starting crease. Then I'm going to take it back over to the anvil, get the hammer out, hammer away at it, and that should hopefully give me that sort of big step that's required on this section of steel. Night and day difference that was. This piece took next to no time in comparison to that other piece. Just goes to show how much easier this metal is to work with when it's slightly thinner. So I am really happy with how that has come out. I still need to do some little touches, obviously. This bottom big step, yeah, a little bit of fettling just to neaten it up a bit. But the bulk of it is there, and I am, yeah, like I say, I'm happy with that result, I think. Now what I'm going to need to do is obviously get it in here, mark around the edges so I can cut it to the right size before I can obviously weld it into place. So I think that's going to be the next step. So I spent 5 minutes chopping away, but it's the next day now for me. Now this piece that I got to go in, this folded edge is pretty much flat, and I know that because I measured it on my Chinese vise, or anvil I should say. So it is in a relatively flat plane. When I fit it to the car, the new panel that I put in isn't in the plane, which I knew about, but it's out a little bit more than I thought it was. Now I think the only way I'm going to get those two to line up is by cutting into that new panel. So it's a little bit of a shame. I would like to have stayed one piece, but to achieve the goal of getting it all straight, yeah, I think I'm just going to have to cut it. So I've marked on the outside edge along essentially the bend line of the curve, and I'm going to just cut it along there in that angle, and that will allow me to get the flat pieces back into the same plane. So with that piece fitting reasonably well, I have put some weld-through primer on the edges that I'm going to weld to, and also on the inside lip, and put some holes in there so I can plug weld it. But as a quick side note, these gloves, or not these specifically, but any gloves, does anybody know of a decent hard-wearing pair of gloves that I can use? So I've gone through all these different types of mechanic gloves. I always end up with holes in the fingers. I have got some leather gloves that I'm going to try next to see how they hold up. But yeah, let me know in the comments below what success you've had with your gloves. So back to the task at hand. I am just starting off by tacking this piece in place, roughly where it needs to be. Now these will probably be sacrificial tacks, And I'm going to use a method essentially the same as the cut and butt method used by Fitzy on his channel. Fantastic fabricator, learned a lot of different techniques from him. And that involves me cutting through both the tacks and the old panel and new panel at the same time, and it will give me an even gap and edge to weld to. Then I will just make sure that the two panels are actually level and flush together. And then I will add more tacks in place, and it should give me a nice even edge all the way around the panel that will then sit flush. Now it is quite a time consuming process, this is, but definitely worth spending the time now than it is trying to make it look better after it's all welded in. Now I'm using those gigantic clamps again, and you can see there is another pair just poking through the hole of the bulkhead. And this is just to ensure that when I plug weld this panel in, the mating faces are flush together. Now these plug welds, I essentially just work in circles. Once I got the weld working nicely, I will just rotate the weld around and around. And it looks quite good as well when you see it from the outside. So I'm a little bit far away here, but I will get the zoom in action, and you will see that circular motion that I apply to the weld to join these panels together. Now this first edge, you can see an even gap between the panels. Well, you might be able to, but it is there. I don't spend too much time waiting and cooling down this panel because it is basically on top of the chassis leg. And that chassis leg is providing a huge amount of rigidity to the sheet metal, so I'm not worried about it warping. Now that being said, the cross section of the weld is flat metal and open and no support, so I do it in little patches working along. Obviously I am speeding up and cutting out a lot of the waiting time, so there's otherwise this video will be 6 times longer than it already is. But yeah, I get that all welded in and it will leave me with a nice solid panel. Then it's just whip the grinder out, take all the welds down, and you should hopefully be left with a nice looking floor again. Okay, beautiful. That floor is welded in and is rock solid. Now it can be a bit tricky to see all of the shiny metal and the curves and the bends. So as a treat for you guys, I got to spray it with a bit of weld through primer just to highlight what the floor actually looks like. Because yeah, it can be a bit difficult sometimes on camera to see it exactly. So there's one for you. Right, so that is now in. Let's concentrate on the next section I need to fix. A nice simple one this time, though I'm not going to cover it in too much detail because it is pretty much just a rectangle. So I get it marked out and cut out in the shear, and as you can see, if you don't bolt it down, if you move it, it makes it very difficult to actually cut. So yeah, it does need to be secured down. And then I just put it in the bender to give it a 90-degree angle. Again, another simple, straightforward process. Probably could have done it in the vise, to be honest with you. Then just treat and clean the area, get it welded in, grind back the welds and just give it a bit of paint when you're done. Next section is that big cut that I made in the panel. Now to start with, I'm just using a hammer and dolly, and now this isn't my usual hammering hand, so I'm doing it just so you can see the process essentially. And I'm just going to bend it all flat in line again. Then I'm going to cut an extremely thin strip of steel in the shear here. Works much better, bolt it down. And then when I straighten the steel out, you will see, because it's so thin, it gives it this bit of a natural curve, which almost perfectly lines up with the cut that I made in the panel. So I'm going to use it as a bit of filler. Now I do take this a little bit gingerly and only do some light welding on it, because the last thing I want to do is just melt that thin sheet of steel. Don't want it to just disappear on me. So on this outer edge, I am taking it a bit ginger, getting it all welded and tacked in, lined up and flush. And then when I have got it all tacked in nicely, I am just going over it in steps, left to right, left, right, left, right, to get it all welded fully. So you can kind of see the steps in the weld, but there is still a gap left at the end. Now this gap, I am just going to bridge the gap with the weld. It actually works out pretty well in the end. And that is what I do, just to fill in the last remaining hole in the panel. Now looking at it from the inside, you can see where I haven't got full penetration, where I was being a bit ginger with it, which is fine. I was happy with that. I've kind of expected it. So what I did was just climb inside the car, again with it rotated over to give me good access. Unfortunately not for the camera. And it allows me to just properly weld these panels together. With those little bits done, it's time to move on to this floor section. Now the floor section should be there. 1 second. So this floor section is, that's all made. Very straight bit of metal, this one. So I'm just going to get some spot weld holes drilled in here, weld it on, and then just cut and butt along the edges. And that section will be done. So that is welded on, went without a hitch, used the techniques I've previously used in the video. So that is done, and I moved on to the next section. Then I noticed I made a mistake. Now this is the other side. I repaired it a little while ago. These areas are renowned for rusting. The problem is they get water in them. Now, what the BMW did was put water outlets in the inner sill to allow the water to drain. And, well, the problem is I haven't done that. In the other repair, I used a hammer in the anvil. It's got a little hole in it, and I managed to put that indentation into the sheet of metal before I welded it onto the car. Now the bit is already welded onto the car, so I can't use that same technique. So I'm going to have to find another way to get around it. So this is what I'm aiming for, and it is recessed a little bit. So I am going to first cut out the metal so that this recess is present. It is also less metal to try and bend. Then I'm going to stack up some shims of metal that I've cut out of the scrap with a big hefty bit of steel on the top of it, and that hopefully will give me some structure. Now that has also left a gap between that bit of steel and the inner wing, and I'm going to take a big G-clamp and clamp it over the top of the steel, and it's in theory going to crush the inner sill into that gap. I don't know if it's going to work, but as you can see, as I tighten it up, it is bending that sheet of metal into the shape that I'm looking for. And for the moment of truth, I disassemble this random contraption of bits of steel and take a look to see what result I am left with. I'm super happy with that. I'm really glad that worked, because if it didn't, I didn't know what I was going to do. So yeah, that's fantastic. Right, okay, so the next piece I'm going to make is the square box that sits on the bottom here. Now this, again, is a very straightforward piece of steel to cut, measure it out, chop it out, and then just bend up the edges until you've got a square cube. So I said this square was nice and easy, and I still managed to have a little bit of a mishap. The corners here, I've cut a little bit too aggressively, and they don't match the ones on the car. Now, I could obviously just weld this on, forget about it, and just call it a day. I could also make a new one, but I don't have any more steel of this size, so that is out of the question. I could take a grinder to the piece that's fitted on there and get those angles matching this one. I think that's probably the easiest option. Or I can weld the corners that cut off back on and then reshape them to the right size. Okay, so yeah, alright, I like to make more work for myself. But yeah, I at least want them matching either side. Now, in my defence, I don't weld on all of the corners, only the ones that are sort of open and exposed on the underside. Obviously, I need to weld them and grind them down, and then I'm actually going to measure the cuts that I need to make this time, instead of just guessing. It always tends to work a bit better. I've also put a couple of holes in the bottom of this square, and I'm going to use that to plug weld it onto the floor of the car. There's also a hole on this sill that I'm plug welding through, and that is that square all nicely held in place. With that done, I just need to make this little infill panel, which I am first off just going to use a dirty glove to mark out on a bit of paper. I can get it cut out, and as you can see, a very simple shape. But I'm just adding this bit of beadwork into it so it matches the other side. And with that done, it is just a case of getting it welded onto the car. So quick inspection for any pinholes, and I've decided I wanted to fill a little bit in here, and that is that welded on. Now I can trim off this excess bit of steel that I left purposely to be able to match the two panels up. So I chop the first section off, rough cut with a grinder, and then I take the flappy disc and just grind the two so that they were smooth and level. Then I can go ahead and just weld along this joint just so that it's all fixed and solid together. And with that done, I can just grind it all back, and then I'm going to give it just a coat of the weld through primer for the time being, just to protect it until I can get back round to finishing it off. Now I think you'll agree that that is starting to look a whole heap better than what it was before. It actually looks like an E30 should look like, or as close as I can get it, with the tools that I've been using. Now up in the arch here, I still need to replace that metal, so I'm not bothering with that at the minute. And the inside I need to do some bracketry, get that back in for the accelerator pedal. But this outside section here, I'm in a bit of a dilemma. Now this obviously potentially could be quite a difficult bit to make. I'm not sure. I could cut it down to sections, make it 3 or 4 different pieces to get it all shaped and weld it in there. The thing that I'm tempted to do is to buy a new outer sill and cut this section out of it. Not only for the difficulty, but also for what lies at the back. So not only might that be tricky to make, but this rear section here is, there's nothing left of it. There are, oh, I won't even call them holes, there are chasms in there that is just, it's all disappeared. Now I don't have a big rolling machine to get that nice curve in it. So what I think I might do in this instance is buy a complete outer sill, rob the front section, rob the rear section, and cheat a little bit. I think it makes the most sense for this situation. With all that being said, I think this video has probably been going on for long enough. So if you've liked what you've seen, give me a like, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more, and join me next time where I can hopefully finish off this area of the E30. See you next time.